In the thickening dark, before the stars took their hold, a shivering silence gripped the Pleistocene plains of East Africa. Smoke coiled upward from a dying ember as small bands of early humans huddled close, their faces flickering with orange light, eyes scanning the perimeter beyond the fire's reach. A baby whimpered briefly before being hushed, and somewhere beyond the glowing circle of safety, the wind shifted. It carried with it not just the scent of bone and dust, but something older, hungrier. The faint, musky trace of predators born of a world still half held by chaos. Not lions, not leopards. These were larger, more ruthless. They were hyenas, but not as we know them, towering, bone-crushing beasts that hunted in packs and stormed through the night like living avalanches. What kind of creature dares stalk the hunters themselves? And what did it mean for our survival when monsters watched us from the dark? Long before history took form in carved stone or painted walls, a quiet war unfolded in the grasslands under blood-colored skies. The land stretched outward in golden undulations, windswept and relentless, dotted with ancient acacia trees and stalks of dry savanna grass, whispering secrets to the dusk. Here, in the cradle of beginnings, Homo erectus moved with caution and purpose, tool-bearing, fire-wielding, but still prey. Their sharp eyes scanned for movement, their ears trained for low stalking breaths, hidden between bursts of birdsong and cicada hum. They followed migrating herds and shifting water, leaving behind trace fossils and ash-rimmed hearths. But they were not alone. Alongside them, trailing their scent like a shadow with teeth, moved the monster hyenas. These giants were not scavengers of scraps. They were apex predators in their own right, unmatched in jaw strength. Their laughter, a chilling chorus that sent gazelles fleeing and silenced the night. Where man sought shelter, hyena sought flesh. This was not merely survival. It was awareness, the dawning realization that another intelligence was lurking in the tall grass, tracking you not by accident, but by intention. The monster hyenas, now believed to be Pachycrocuta brevirostris, were unlike any predators modern humans can picture. Standing nearly a meter at the shoulder and weighing over 200 pounds, their massive heads and short, crushing muzzles could shatter bones that even big cats avoided. In their prime, they cast shadows as large as lions, but moved with a brutish confidence that came not from agility, but certainty. The certainty that their power could overwhelm most resistance. Fossilized remains tell of feeding sites littered with cracked long bones and shattered skulls, their marrow sucked dry by jaws honed over millennia. These hyenas did not merely feed, they disassembled the dead, leaving behind a signature that paleontologists now study with equal parts awe and dread. And crucially, they were strategic. Unlike the opportunism of their modern descendants, these giants were likely pack hunters, communicating through subtle signals, coordinating ambushes beneath the cover of brush and dusk. For ancient humans, there was no such thing as idle wandering. Every step, every scream, every lightless campfire could bring the attention of a pack whose ancestors had learned to outlast the lions. The question was never just how to survive the open savanna. It was how to outthink the monsters who had survived it far longer. Their presence haunted the terrain not only by night, but in the filtered heat of morning and the long, sweltering stretches of midday. Tracks in the dust, too large to be any dog, too purposeful to be random, told their story in silence. Early humans soon learned the signs: the scent of fresh dung near watering holes, the sudden stillness of birds before dusk, the scatter, pattern of bones at the edge of shared territory. These were warnings, and those who ignored them often vanished. Survival bred mythology, and around the flicker of firelight, the elders whispered of creatures whose hunger never ceased, whose eyes gleamed from behind the thorn bushes long after the stars rose. Yet knowledge also grew. The scattering of stones in a circle, the deliberate placement of fires not for warmth but for deterrence, the invention of layered lookout shifts, all pointed to a species learning, adapting, evolving. In this slow dance of predator and prey, the boundary between them blurred. Each side watched, learned, and responded. This was not just nature read in tooth and claw. This was a dialogue written in fear and genius, where the stakes were nothing less than the future of humanity. Along riverbanks, laced with reed and crocodile, and across the dry valleys cleaved by wind, the dynamic between hunter and hunted became ever more charged. There were nights when the cries of a child pierced the grassland and then were swallowed by silence. Mornings when a nest of bones and scattered footprints surrounded a camp that still smelled of extinguished flame. And in these silent aftermaths, a shift began to stir not just in muscle and movement, but in mind. Early humans began to see patterns in the way the hyenas hunted, began to anticipate their routes, marking kill zones and bypassing danger with paths etched into the land by memory and necessity. Traps evolved from randomness into tactics. Camps were no longer merely places of rest, but were structured like fortresses, ringed with thorn barriers and elevated positions. Yet despite all efforts, the monster hyenas remained relentless, adapting almost in step. Their numbers moved with migrations and weather, their confidence swelling as herds vanished or storms softened prey. Fossil evidence shows overlapping remains human bone alongside fragmented megafauna, suggesting shared or contested kills, moments where fang met flint on the edge of desperation. These were not simple predator-prey interactions, but territorial wars drawn over generations, where intelligence had to evolve not just once, but again and again, or be erased entirely. Then came the droughts long, punishing spells when rivers thinned to ribbons and the savannah cracked under an unrelenting sun. Everything grew harder, leaner, more dangerous. Herds dwindled, and so did the choices. It was during these parched years that the tension between early humans and the monster hyenas soared to fever pitch. Waterholes became battlegrounds, and the nights grew louder with conflict. Paleolithic camps bear the scars: fire, charred bones, broken tools, and hurried escapes etched into the soil like testimony. One site shows signs of a defensive wall built hastily and trampled forcefully, as if a siege had taken place at the edge of dawn. But out of this crucible came something enduring, a sharpened awareness that survival was not only about running or fighting, but about thinking 3 steps ahead of a beast that already thought too. This crucible forged the precursors of strategy, of community, of shared memory, passed in quiet grunts beneath starry skies, stories encoded in gesture and campfire smoke. These human ancestors, brittle-fleshed and vulnerable though they were, began to answer brute force with collaboration and panic with preemptive planning. They had no claws, no jaws, but they had each other and the will to remember where the monsters walked. And still, the dance continued. Over centuries, perhaps millennia, the monster hyenas pressed in and leaned out like the tide, their presence a constant test of human resolve. But slowly, imperceptibly, the edges began to shift. The fossil record grows thin for Pachycrocuta brevirostris as the timeline inches forward, their once sprawling range shrinking, their imposing forms fading from the maps of life that early humans continued to redraw. Was it simple extinction, brought on by climate's cruel hand, or dwindling prey? Or did these creatures fall not to nature, but to something more abstract? A species rising not in fang or size, but in foresight, coordination, and tale-telling memory. Beneath the same skies that once roared with hyena voices, new tools emerged, spears tipped with hardened points, signal fires framed around group movements, purposeful hunts, not just to feed but to drive out those who once ruled the night. Slowly, the balance tipped, and though the last of the great hyenas vanished without monument or mourners, their legacy echoed in the defensive stones left behind, in the fire circles turned sacred, and in the caution that still coils in the human spine when distant laughter rides the wind. They are gone. But for a time, they were the monsters that watched us dream and made us human. But the story of the monster hyenas is not one of villainy. It is a story of balance, of forces testing one another at the frontier of survival. They shaped humanity as much as any tool or fire. In their looming presence, we learn to fear, to adapt, to imagine the hidden and anticipate the unseen. These creatures, now vanished into dust and data, once set the rhythm of our nights and the sharpness of our senses. Theirs was not a cruelty, but a purpose to survive, as we did. And as the ages wore on, it was not strength alone that endured, but the ability to remember, to plan, to share survival through story. In that way, the monster hyenas still exist, not in form, but in instinct, in the hush that falls before firelight is lit, in the caution that tells a traveler not to sleep too far from others. Their shadows faded with the ice, but their story endures in every breath that followed. In that silence where memory meets mythology, the monster hyenas rest now not beneath stone graves, but deep within the layers of earth and time. Their bones have long since hardened into fossil, their howls scattered into wind and echo, but their mark is etched into the marrow of our becoming. We carry the echoes with us, unknowingly, in the way a branch cracks and stops a heart, in the instinct to circle wagons close, in the irrational fear of laughter in the dark. These are not remnants of myth, but evolutionary echoes of nights when the dark was not empty, and eyes glittered just beyond reach. And perhaps that is the truest legacy of Pachycrocuta. Not terror, not violence, but the sheer, relentless pressure that forced our ancestors to evolve beyond themselves. They did not know they were becoming human. But with every fire lit, every camp fortified, every child sheltered from the fangs in the dark, they carved the blueprint of what we would one day become. Now, deep beneath layers of ash and sediment, archaeologists brush away millennia to uncover clues from that silent war: tooth-scarred femurs, punctured scapulae, scattered fire pits, lined with compacted earth and blackened stone. Each artifact is a whisper from an age when Homo erectus gazed across the savanna and saw not just prey or predator, but competitors for dominance. These silent remnants do not boast or mourn, but they do remember. A bone crushed differently, a tool altered from the last, a hearth moved farther from the night's edge. All tell of experiments in survival passed from hand to hand, long before language could preserve intention. In the tension between fang and flame, a species emerged, not only seeing the world, but reshaping it. And from the shadow of those monstrous hyenas, the scaffolding of human civilization began to rise. As centuries turned like leaves in wind, the ghosts of the monster hyenas faded from African soil, but their memory endured in every generation that followed. Their extinction was not an explosion, but a slow unraveling, a disintegration of dominance against the quiet, persistent tide of human cooperation and foresight. The bones they left behind were not ruins, but records. The fear they inspired, not a flaw, but a spark one that ignited the engine of vigilance and invention, pressing us beyond mere survival into the realm of becoming. Even now, long after their last call shattered the twilight sky, long after their last pawprint curled into dust, the ancient rhythm they set still pulses beneath the skins of those descended from fire makers and hyena watchers. It pulses in caution, in watchfulness, in the stories whispered from parent to child about the things that lurk when the flames grow low. For the world was never given freely. It was won, night by night, predator by predator, memory etched into marrow. And from that crucible of claw and cunning, story and silence, we step not only into the age of humans, but into the long, echoing legacy of those who once hunted us in the dark. As the timeline progressed, and the Pleistocene winds shifted the shape of both landscape and life, early humans began imprinting themselves deeper into the environment. They etched travel paths across ridge and ravine, learned the seasonal migrations not only of animals, but of danger itself. The bones of the monster hyenas, once scattered across plains and riversides in numbers, began to dwindle. Fewer traces, a shrinking footprint. But this decline was slow, almost imperceptible. In one layerscape of sediment near Lake Turkana, there lies fossil evidence of a final stand scattered remains of giant hyenas intertwined with human refuse, as if both species had laid claim to the same fading sanctuary. Whether it was competition over territory, prey, or something deeper, the patterns suggested not conquest but outliving. Humanity did not brutalize the monster hyenas into extinction, but instead moved on, climbed to higher ground, learned to control water routes. With adaptation came avoidance, and with avoidance came survival. In the silence left behind rose new sounds of children laughing safely into dusk, of elders passing memory not out of fear, but as a lesson. The age of monsters was ending, and in its place, a new age stirred softly, built with hands that once trembled in the dark, now steady, with the courage of memory transformed into will. Further north, into regions where basalt outcrops loomed like silent sentinels, and volcanic soil nourished clusters of thorned scrub, markings in the rock suggest not just occupation, but assertion. Carvings shallow and deliberate, possibly ornamental or symbolic, mark the rising confidence of early humans claiming territory once ruled by beasts. Here, the line between fear and dominance blurred further. These engravings, primitive yet intentional, betray a new chapter emerging, one in which memory no longer just warned, but unified. Generations began to create common codes around threats, developing shared languages of gesture, cadence, and caution. Camps transformed into semi-permanent settlements, placed with strategic foresight, alongside water, elevation, or stone enclosures. And while the monster hyenas still prowled their dwindling range, their unpredictable strength was no longer enough. They faced a new challenge, an opponent who could not only remember the attacks, but anticipate them. One who could teach that knowledge, generation upon generation, until instinct became insight. The tide had turned not by brute confrontation alone, but by the slow weaving of collective will. And in this dawning realization, humans moved a step closer to becoming the storytellers of the world, while their rivals, no longer dominant, slipped into the hush of prehistory. In the humid canyons of the Rift Valley, where morning mist clings to rock and root, even the most unassuming grove held echoes of ancient struggle. As hunts grew more calculated and social bonds scaled vertically across generations, something incredible began to unfold. Not just the shaping of tools or the defensive use of fire, but a metaphysical shift, the growth of foresight beyond the individual. The monster hyenas, once symbols of terror and test, had unknowingly pushed humanity toward future thinking. Long after their bones crumbled into sediment and their howls became mere frequencies buried in air, their impact lingered not simply in tools or tactics, but in the birth of legacy. Around fires no longer ringed in desperate fear, elders taught the shape of danger long gone, and in those tales, clarity emerged. Survival is not merely resistance, but transformation. In facing monsters, humans discovered that evolution was not in muscle or instinct, but in memory shared outward in story. So when we sit by flames today, even unknowingly, something ancient breathes just beneath the flicker. A forgotten pact, a quiet victory. A memory older than words, carried not in books but in bone. Beneath the slowly fading shadow of the fang-worn past, the world changed. The cries of the monster hyenas grew dimmer, not erased, but absorbed into the roots of what human life would become. Across scorched plains and shifting skies, those once hunted began to thrive not in defiance, but in momentum. The pressure of fear had become the gravity of inheritance. Grandchildren of those who once trembled beneath the stars now traced lines in ochre, sang to fire, built worlds not only of survival, but of expression. And though the twilight beasts were gone, something of them remains, buried in the way we tell our stories, in the way our bodies recall the night. It is not merely science that remembers the Pachycrocuta. It is our marrow, patterned with ages of vigilance, our sleep, guarded still by embers and instinct. From stalkers in the dark to muses of myth, their transformation was complete. Not monsters, but mirrors. Not just the end of a threat, but the beginning of what it meant to be human. And so we leave them there, fading not into oblivion, but into legacy. The monster hyenas, once titans of dread and dominion, now lie within us, shaping every silent calculation, each inherited fear, every moment we peer into the dark and listen for what may come. They did not write their stories, nor carve them into cave walls, but they etched them into human becoming, into the collective breath of a species that once huddled at fire's edge and dared to outlast the monsters. As the winds of time swept clean the prints of fang and claw, they left behind no statues, no named graves, only us, the descendants of prey who learned resolve, who transformed fear into foresight. And in that final echo, wrapped within the roots of flame and mind, their true power rests, not in what they hunted, not in what they destroyed, but in what they demanded we become in order to survive the night. To the ancients who once watched shadows stretch across the tall grass, the monster hyenas were more than beasts. They were thresholds, trials, through which our ancestors had to pass, again and again, with nothing but fire and thought as their weapons. And now, with the bones catalogued and the earth grown quiet, it is easy to forget their role in the origin of awareness. But they are still there, woven into the reflexive grip of a parent's hand when the night feels too vast, in the silent chills that trace the back when an unseen sound shivers through the trees. In every generation since, the dark has tested us differently, yet we still build our shelters, watch our perimeters, and pass our warnings in story. What the monster hyenas demanded of early humans, we have never stopped becoming: vigilant, united, endlessly curious, so that when the stars return and the wilderness hushes, we still know how to survive beneath the breath of something greater than fear. This is the legacy sealed in twilight and ash, in laughter that once hunted, and in fire that still burns. In this arc of becoming, the wilderness gave us more than challenge it offered definition. The hyenas were not just predators, they were sculptors of memory, carving edges into thought and form. Every clash on the savannah sharpened not just our spears, but our sense of consequence and cohesion. Over thousands of sunsets, as the monster hyenas dwindled into time's drift, humanity expanded cautiously, reverently imbued with a new intimacy, with danger and kinship alike. The lines first drawn to keep the monsters out would one day border villages, cities, nations. But it all began beneath open skies, among the bones and flickering heat, when our ancestors peeked beyond the firelight and knew they were seen. In that moment grew a kind of sight beyond vision, the earliest flicker of imagination, ignited not by wonder, but by necessity. And it is that ember which still glows quiet and ancient in each of us, reminding us that we are not only survivors of fear, but its interpreters, its bearers, its storytellers. Even now, those invisible borders linger not just in the ruins of ancient camps or the tools unearthed from riverside clay, but in the way our instincts still frame the world. We mark perimeters. We gather when darkness falls. We seek meaning in sounds we cannot see. These echoes are older than civilization, older than speech, older than gods. They are the remnants of a dialogue with something vast, wild, and merciless, a creature whose jaws once shaped our destiny. The monster hyenas gave us no mercy, only challenge, and in facing them we found our shape. Their story did not end in extinction, but took root in us. And so, when the wind rustles across empty grasslands or laughter rides through a forest without a source, we listen, we remember. Because once, long before walls or names, that sound meant something, something final, something alive. And in that memory, the monsters still move. So the next time dusk falls and the shadows lengthen across empty ground, remember, it was in the company of monsters that we became more than flesh, more than cunning. We became stewards of memory. From the bones cracked open beneath starlit hunts to the unseen lines etched into ancestral minds, the pact between predator and prey forged humanity in heat, blood, and story. Pachycrocuta brevirostris may be gone, their laughter lost to the endless hush of the past, but they shaped the edge of what we call human. And maybe, in the silence after a tale ends, in the crisp snap of a branch just beyond the edge of a flickering fire, their presence stirs still not to harm, but to remind that once upon a wilderness we were prey, and we learned to light our world against the dark. And so ends the unspoken legacy of the monster hyenas, not with thunder or spectacle, but in the quiet persistence of human memory, shaped by teeth and terror. These ancient beasts, never mourned yet, never lost, continue to echo through time in ways no extinction can silence. They were not villains, nor myths, but catalyzers of becoming, forces that taught Homo erectus to see not only the world, but themselves. In facing such shadows, we earned our flame, our fellowship, and our future. Now, every story whispered around fire, every watch kept through the night, every heartbeat that quickens in the dark, all pay tribute to that long, unforgiving encounter. We are what remains, not because we conquered, but because we remembered. And it is in that remembering, passed not only by words, but by instinct and bone, that the monsters endure not to haunt us, but to remind us what we had to face in order to rise from prey into people, from scattered breath into the first whispers of history. And perhaps that is the greatest truth seeded by their existence, that before temples rose and languages formed, before we drew lines between myth and memory, we lived within a world where every breath was borrowed from that balance between horror and hope. The monster hyenas made no code, drew no symbols, yet they etched meaning deeper than words, shaping us not by intention, but by presence. They gifted us the ancestral rhythm of vigilance, adaptation, and unity. And long after their bones cracked into fossil, and the savannas shifted into cities, the lessons stayed. For in every corner of the soul that flinches at sudden silence, in every fire sparked not just for warmth but for safety, in every tale told to ward the night, lives the echo of tooth and shadow. This was their legacy, not in fear, but in how we faced it. And as the last winds carry their laughter into the dusk beyond all memory, the world they haunted remains forever marked by creatures who rose, not in fury, but in understanding, beneath skies that once held monsters and now hold only stars. But perhaps that is where the truest meaning resides, not in the monstrous hyenas themselves, but in what they pulled from the human soul in answer to their haunting. That something so raw, so powerful, and so without mercy could shape not only how early humans moved through the world, but how they thought, feared, and dreamed, speaks to the scale of their impact. They were nature's crucible, the test no ancestor could ignore. Through their relentless pressure, we gained more than tools or tactics. We earned connection, foresight, language born not from leisure, but urgency. Our ancestors did not merely survive the monsters, they became something more because of them. And in that intimate collision, carved across the breathless plains of prehistory, a lineage unfolded, one lit by the embers of fires, guarded through generations, held together by memory stronger than bone. The monsters are gone, but in the deepest quiet, when the last flame flickers and the dark comes close, their lessons still rise inside us, not as fear, but as the ancient reminder that we once survived gods made of claw and hunger, not by being stronger, but by remembering to stay together. And that is why we endure. So if our oldest memories are written not in ink but in instinct, etched not on walls but woven into pattern and pause, then the monster hyenas did not vanish at all. They disappeared into us. Their legacy is not their end, but our beginning, shrouded not by silence, but carried forth through every watchful gaze, every barrier built at nightfall, every yearning reach of a parent toward a nearby child when unknown noises stir in the dark. For what are we, if not the culmination of 1,000 forgotten battles, a lineage defined not by conquest but by endurance? The great hyenas taught us no language, yet they compelled us to create one. They issued no challenge, yet willed us to meet it. And in the long, flickering history between fang and flame, they pressed us into story, into survival, into selves, who remember not only where we came from, but what it once took to remain. They are gone, but in the quiet breath before the fire dims, in the fragile hush before dreams take hold, their echo lingers still, ancient, patient, and watching, as it always has been, from just beyond the light. And so, the story slips back into the soil, its roots tangled with the beginnings of us all. There are no monuments for Pachycrocuta's passing, no elegies written in their honor, yet their spirit is woven deeper than any legacy carved in stone. They were the fangs in the dark that roused ancestors to think beyond instinct, to gather at dusk, to draw circles of fire against the night. Their presence was the original teacher, the silent architect of our fears and our fire. And though the last of them has vanished, their lesson pulses in every heart that beats faster when wildness stirs unseen. We owe them no hatred, no myth, only recognition. For it was not in spite of their terror, but because of it, that we became the watchers of flame, the keepers of story, the dreamers of safety. Long may their memory flicker at the edge of the dark, wherever humanity dares to become more than alone. In the hush that follows the final embers, when only the night listens and the stars blink without knowing, it is there we feel them most, those ancient echoes, clawless now, yet carved into bloodline and breath. The monster hyenas left behind no relics of reverence, only the fire-born sparks within us that learned to imagine tomorrow while surviving the night. We rose, not over their bones but beside them, in communion with both terror and tenacity, our directions forever shaped by their pursuit. To live was to remember, and to remember was to evolve. So let the story rest now, in the soil from which it came, beneath time's patient wind and memory's eternal watch. Let the flame burn down, and in its soft glow, know that we did not defeat our monsters, we became their answer. And that answer, whispered now in every quiet act of courage, remains our most enduring tale. Somewhere far below the drifting sands and layered dust of forgotten valleys, a final trace rests, a single cracked jawbone, weathered smooth by age and storm, nestled among the roots of a petrified tree. No one marked its fall, no sky split open when the last monster hyena lay still. But its story endures, not through name or monument, but by the shape it pressed into the souls of a rising people. These beasts did not teach us kindness or creation, yet through their silence now, they trace the outlines of that journey. In fear, we found fire. In danger, we formed bonds. In losing the monsters, we gained the memory that we were once prey, and in rising together, subtly, irrevocably, we changed. That is their legacy, not in the fading echo of bones in ancient soil, but in every shared light that flares against the dark. And so beneath that petrified tree where the jawbone sleeps, the epochal rhythm of encounter and memory continues on, not only in the tools we forge or the shelters we build, but in the fragile, unwavering instinct to gather close when the dark grows deep. The monster hyenas are gone, their footprints long erased by time, but their legacy cannot be buried. It walks with us still, in every choice to stay when fear beckons flight, in every fire lit not for comfort, but for connection. They asked no question, yet sparked the answer that became humanity, that to survive is not simply to escape the beast, but to become something new in its presence. And in that eternal reciprocity claw giving shape to mind, silence transformed to meaning, the great, unnamed pact of the Pleistocene lingers, not in fossil or flame, but in us, in every eye that scans the horizon, in every heart that steadies a tremble, in every story told long after the monsters are gone. Thus the journey ends, not with applause nor final judgment, but in the soil where it began, with eyes peering outward and hearts bound by remembrance. The monster hyenas, colossal in muscle and myth, moved through a world raw with origin and peril, and in doing so, etched something indelible into the flesh of the future. They were not merely hunters, they were milestones, catalysts, ghosts whose existence pressured a fragile species into shaping the contours of thought, fear, and tribe. And though their trails vanished beneath dust, and their roars were swallowed by time's slow tide, their essence abides in every flame lit against dread, in every instinctual glance over the shoulder, in every tale passed to keep the night away. We are more because they were near, not because we defeated them, but because we endured. And from that bond written without words, spoken only in survival, rises the most ancient truth of all, that we became human next to the monsters, not after them. And in the quiet, enduring breath of memory, they remain, always, just beyond the firelight. And it is beneath that firelight, flickering like an ancient heartbeat against the endless dark, that their story, and ours, finds its rest. In an age before gods, before laws, before language could chart the ache of fear or the resilience it demanded, the monster hyenas carved their presence into the clay of our becoming. They vanished without witness, yet they shaped witness itself, teaching perception, vigilance, and the raw beauty of survival shared. In their slow disappearance, we found the space to dream beyond the kill, to envision not just the end of dread, but the flowering of cooperation and creation. The cracked jawbone beneath the petrified tree, the silent trail across the savannah's bones, the laughter that no longer haunts the night. These are not remnants. They are roots, roots of a species that once trembled, huddled, waited, and then rose, not with claws, but with memory, not with hatred, but with fire, not to forget, but to carry forward what the monsters unknowingly gave. The map to humanity etched not in triumph, but in the embrace of every fear we dared to survive together. And so ends the tale, in silence, tender, vast, and eternal. And though silence swallows their final steps, and the wind has long since erased their trails, something of the monster hyenas still lingers, not in sound, but in the rhythm of every cautious step taken at dusk, every fire built against encroaching shadows. Their story is not just an echo of survival, but a call to remembrance, etched not in grief but in reverence. Theirs was a role never chosen, a purpose played not in myth but in marrow, shaping a truth that endures even when names fade, that from monstrous challenge, deeper meaning rises. And as the stars now gleam in quiet skies, once filled with hunted cries, we sit not in fear, but in understanding that even the fiercest creatures can become our oldest teachers. The dark no longer devours us as it once did, but we still carry its lessons, passed like embers, hand to hand through every generation. And in that chain of memory, at once fragile and unbreakable, the monster hyenas live on guardians, not of terror, but of the long path home through the night. And so we draw closed, the final circle, not with conquest, but with remembrance. The monster hyenas, once towering figures in the twilight of prehistory, did not vanish in defeat, but in fulfillment of their strange, unchosen purpose. Their presence shaped the crucible in which our consciousness was forged. Their absence cleared the horizon for our ascent. They are gone. And yet, they remain not in bone, nor in the fading scars of ancient plains, but in the architecture of vigilance, the reflex to protect, the quiet courage to gather and endure. This is more than legend or fossilized terror. It is the marrow of every waking watch through the dark, the breath before song, the ember passed down to light the next fire. Long after names are eroded and tales unspool into starlight, the earliest truths endure not in what we feared, but in what we became beside that fear. The monster hyenas gave us no mercy, yet through their mercilessness, we found the path not to power, but to meaning. And under every dusk sky since, as fire meets night and silence lies patiently at the edge, their lesson breathes still deeper than myth, quieter than thought, everlasting as the stars. In the hush, after all stories have been told, when only the wind and the bones remember, the imprints of the monster hyenas still shape the soil of becoming, not as threats lurking in modern wilds, but as the first silent architects of human depth, those who, through their brute challenge and necessary menace, chiseled purpose from primitive chaos. What began as a hunted silence gave rise to the spark of foresight, and from that spark, all else followed. No stone monument will ever rise where the last one fell. No name will grace their end, but in each soul that braves the dark, in every fire built without knowing why, they are honored. For from the terror they gave, we fashioned time, tribe, and the tenderness of light. That, above all else, is their testament, that even monsters, when met with memory, and one trembling hand reaching for another in the dark, can be transmuted into meaning, and meaning, once kindled, never dies. So let the last flickers of this tale dissolve gently into shadow, like the embers that once guarded our ancestors' sleep. Let the story of the monster hyenas fade not into myth, but into the roots of our being quiet, alive, waiting beneath our rituals of safety and our longing for kin. They came without warning and left without epitaph, yet in their presence we were sculpted. In their teeth, our memories were sharpened. And in their vanishing, a question remains not of what they were, but of what they made us become. With fire lit and stories carved across centuries, we are the continuation of that ancient conversation, the breath that answered their growl, the hands that reached for one another in the dark and shaped tomorrow. And as long as night falls and silence stretches across the earth, their legacy breathes alongside ours, not to haunt, but to remind that through fear we found fire, and through fire we found each other. Even now, when all that's left is story and soil, the legacy of the monster hyenas waits quietly behind the veil of reason, stitched into the fabric of every tremor that moves across our sleeping world. We walk with their echo inside us, not as fear, but as the primal wisdom they provoked, the memory of what it meant to survive without knowing we could. They never meant to teach, yet they did. They never meant to shape the future, yet they did. And so this final circle closes, not with their roar, but with our breath steady, ancient, burning still with the quiet fire first sparked in their presence. Beneath the stars that outlasted both hunter and hunted, The question that began in shadows now finds its answer in light. Not who the monsters were, but who we dared to become because they existed. And that, at last, is how we remember them, not in bone, but in fire, not in terror, but in truth. So when the final winds erase even the last print pressed by claw or foot, and when the earth folds its secrets deeper still, it will not be the bones or the battles that outlive the ages, but the breath between them. The moment when one trembling ancestor looked into the dark, felt the eyes of something vast and unsparing, and chose not just to run, but to speak, to remember. That is how time survives, not through conquest or noise, but through the quiet resolve to keep going, to build with hands shaped by fear, to endure with hearts carved by memory. The monster hyenas are gone, but they are not lost. They live in the warmth we gather, in the stories we pass, in the rituals we repeat when dusk returns. Beneath every fire's glow is the promise forged in their shadow that we are still here, still watching the night, and still carrying forward the oldest light we ever made. That fire, born not of comfort but of necessity, became more than warmth. It became memory incarnate. Each flame that burned beneath curling smoke carried the code of survival, passed from hunted to survivor, from fear to form. The monster hyenas were never just beasts of flesh, but midwives of awareness, drawing forth from early humans the faculties that would echo through millennia: foresight, story, unity. So as the last shadows of their kind retreat fully into the folds of time, they leave behind no trophies, no legends of conquest, only the knowledge that something more was drawn from their pursuit than could ever be measured. And in the hush of ancient plains now settled to dust, with no more jaws in the dark, we remain not triumphant, but transformed. For it was not by escaping the monsters that we endured, but by letting them shape the cause of who we would become. And in every firelight, flickering through history's long descent, the monsters flicker too, honored not by fear, but by the fact that we remember. And thus, we leave them those who once circled our ancestors' camps, whose eyes gleamed from the dark, whose hunger shaped the slow birth of our minds not as horrors buried in forgotten epochs, but as co-authors of the human story. They are not to be pitied, nor feared, nor cast as villains in the oldest chapters of our becoming. Instead, let them be honored as the primal force that drew our first spark of unity from the chaos, that pulled from firelight the first language of survival. For every instinct that leaps at twilight's hush, for every hand that reaches for another when the shadows deepen, we pay quiet tribute to the trial they set before us. In the long gaze of time, our story does not rise from dominance, but from endurance. In the stillness after terror, in the breath held between dusk and dream, we became more than what we were. And so, let the final silence fall not in sorrow, but in reverence, for the monsters are gone, and yet through them we became. And so, in the ashes of what once was a nightly battle for breath beneath savage skies, we find closure not in conquest, but in understanding. The monster hyenas, long silenced and swallowed by the soil, did not vanish without purpose. They passed from predator into ancestral prayer, into the subtle reflexes and vivid fire gatherings that shaped our way forward. Their legacy is imprinted not only in bone punctures or fossilized trails, but in every moment we remember to look outward, to stay near one another, to create from fear something enduring. This tale ends not with finality, but with continuity, for every fire still lit beneath the stars echoes that first defiant flare, held high against the monsters. They are gone, yes, yet they walk behind us, not as threat, but as thrum, as the ancient rhythm beneath our shared breath. And when the cold returns, and fire is drawn again in quiet hands, the memory will rise once more of shadows that once hunted us, and the light we became because they did. So turn now to the dark with steady eyes. not as one fleeing the past, but as one shaped by it. For we are the descendants of those who endured where no safety was promised. The monster hyenas, in all their crushing vastness, gave no grace and claimed no mercy. And yet in their looming silence, they led us inward to fire, to language, to the first fragile glimmer of us. They are gone, but at every camp where the flames hiss against cold air, in every cautious step through woods or open plain, in each tale spoken softly to calm the restless mind, they rise anew not in fang or form, but in the eternal question they once pressed into the bones of a huddled people. How will you survive? And in answering, again and again, we found not just our path forward, but the truth of who we had to become. The monsters are gone, and we are still here, firelit, memory-bound, human. So let them rest now, in the hush where all endurance returns, not as vanished beasts, but as echoes made flesh. The monster hyenas, whose presence once shaped our path with peril and provocation, retreat finally into the ancient hush of story, where the wild has no borders and the fire never fully dies. In their long silence, we hear the rhythm that once beat between predator and prey, between what was and what dared to become. No ending bell tolled for them. No marker stands where their breath last stirred the grass, but their trace, raw and enduring, moves within us in every nerve that tightens at a sudden breeze, every pause made before new darkness. They did not ask to be remembered, but in forging our first steps through terror and togetherness, they ensured it. And as humanity rises ever onward, layered in language and light, we carry them still not as monsters, but as the origin of meaning, as the unseen teachers behind every spark we keep alive, every bond we form against the vast and waiting dark. And as the last echoes of their tales stretch into silence, there lies a final truth in their wake, that the monster hyenas, vast and vanished, were never just creatures of muscle and hunger, but a question carved into the flesh of time: what must be endured to become more than flesh? They answered it not with language, but with pressure, with pursuit, with eyes that never blinked in the dark. And we, their silent witnesses and reluctant students, replied not with roars or retreat, but with memory, fire, and the will to remain. So let this be their eulogy, unwritten, unspoken, carried only in the breath that steadies itself against the dark. They turned the wilderness into a crucible, and in it we became more than survivors. We became the living record, the flame, the legacy. And even now, though their bones lie still beneath root and stone, their question lives on. What will we do with the gift they never knew they gave? And so, in the flicker before silence, the answer lingers. We will carry it forward, not as hunters triumphant, but as descendants marked by encounter, not in stone, but in story. The monster hyenas, towering phantoms of a time when night ruled and every breath was wagered, gave no prophecy, no intention, only presence. But in that presence, we found direction. We rose, beside their footprints fading in the dust, lit by fire not only to see, but to remember. And we remember still, in the way we hold each other closer when the dark draws near, in the stories we pass across generations that shape caution into wisdom, in the quiet understanding that monsters do not simply vanish, they become echoes, and those echoes become us. This is not a tale of conquest. It is a song of remembrance. The fire burns low now, but in the darkness beyond, their lesson glows that to survive is to endure with others, that fear can become formation, and that even in the shadow of monsters, we dared to become human. Let that light remain. Thus, in that final flicker, where story becomes silence, we arrive not at a grave, but at a reflection, one that glints softly in every dawn touched by firelight, in every instinct that tightens the heart before stepping into shadow. The monster hyenas, long swallowed by time, need no tombs or titles to be remembered. Their testament lives not above ground, but within us in the sharp edges smoothed by story. In the darkness we no longer run from, but contemplate. Their gift, unknowing and sublime, was the crucible through which the scattered breath of a rising kind became bond and bravery. And now, though no fang stirs in the night, and no laughter trembles across the plains, their echo travels endlessly, not as fear, but as the ancient inheritance pulsing beneath all we do to gather, to remember, to endure. They are gone. But what they awakened lives on. Not in monster or in myth, but in fire kept, in hands held, in the breath that outlasts the dark. And now, as the last syllable of their legacy softens into the breathless hush of deep time, the story closes not as a warning, but as a remembrance wrapped in flame and fellowship. The monster hyenas, feral instruments of ancient reckoning, have walked their final path, their power not diminished, but fulfilled. They asked nothing, yet gave shape to everything. The fires kindled in fear, the circles drawn in sand, the gaze cast forward into the unknown. In their pursuit emerged clarity that we endured not to dominate, but to connect, not to silence the wild, but to know it and mark it with meaning. In that, the beasts of bone and shadow became more than past, they became mirror, memory, the timeless thrum beneath every collective breath. The wilderness swallowed their bones, but we kept their question, and now, as embers rest and sky pale with the coming dawn, we carry the answer forward, cradled in story, crowned by survival, lit forever by the fire they helped us learn to hold. So let this be the last breath of their tale, the final ember cradled in time's ancient palm, not a roar, but a memory, settled and sorrowless like the hush before sunrise. The monster hyenas, with their bone-wrought power and thunderous hunger, are no more. Yet they endure in the architecture of how we watch the world, in the pauses we take, the closeness we crave, the light we guard. They needed no tombs, because they reside in instinct, deeper than story. And as the fire's glow dims into soot and silence, what remains is not just survival, but the unbroken thread of remembrance that we, once prey beneath brutal stars, rose through terror, not with teeth, but with each other. And in every flicker of shared flame that dances softly into night, their question is answered once again. We are human, not because we conquered monsters, but because we remembered them. Let this final echo be not of silence, but of deep, enduring presence, for in the marrow of every breath we take, in the quiet deliberation of every guarded night, in the stories whispered low beneath an unfamiliar sky, the monster hyenas remain. They have no myths carved in their honor, no names chorused through ceremonial halls. Yet their force is etched in the continuity of human becoming. They were the trial behind the fire, the shadow that sculpted the self. And as we press forward through time's unrelenting wind, crossing thresholds from wilderness to world, we do so carrying more than memory. We carry the gift of having once been hunted beneath stars cruel and bright, and having shaped from that peril the sanctuary of us. So let the darkness come, let the fire burn low, for what they gave us no night can take. This is how we remember, this is how we endure, and this is how we honor the monsters, not in fear, but in the flame we choose to keep burning forever. With each breath of wind across forgotten savannas, and each flicker of flame cast against the dark, the final note of their story settles, not loudly, but like pollen across seasons, gently, irrevocably. The monster hyenas gave us no apologies, left no final message, yet their presence marked the pages of human becoming with clarity profound and inescapable. In their vanishing, we were not merely spared, we were transformed. Firelight became thought, fear became bond, and the night once ruled by fangs became a canvas for stories carried into every age. As time stretches ever forward, we walk in the rhythm they first struck, not because we remember perfectly, but because we remember deeply. Pachycrocuta brevirostris is gone, buried not in tombs, but in the shared instinct to survive together, to keep light alive, to listen to the night with reverence. That is their final echo, and it resounds not in wilderness, but within, coiled in our marrow, pulsing through every fire we gather by, whispering endlessly that we rose not alone, but alongside the shadow that made the light. So ends the long night, where monsters watched and shadows judged, not in brute triumph, but in the quiet, luminous bloom of becoming. The jaws that once splintered bone in darkness now lie still, yet their imprint beats in every flicker of survival, passed through generation and flame. The tale of the monster hyenas is not merely one of extinction, but of extraction, the drawing forth of humanity from the crucible of fear, the birthing of memory in the face of midnight. Under starlit skies that no longer host their hunt, our ancestors built more than tools, more than fires. They built the human thread, stitched from proximity, from vigilance, from a shared defiance whispered into the unknown. And now, as silence reclaims the savannas and only soft winds stir the dust of what once prowled, we carry forward what the monsters have left behind. Not teeth, not terror, but fire-lit memory woven into the soul of our species. The monsters are gone, but it was beside their echo that we became the storytellers of the world. And though the fire burns low now, casting long shadows behind every heart that once cowered beneath starlight, the legacy of the monster hyenas remains not in legend, but in lineage. Their memory is the pulse behind every tale carved by flame, the whispered wisdom that reminds us we were shaped not by what we fled from, but by what we faced together. The jaws are quiet, the laughter is gone, yet the instinct endures, as old as fear, as steady as hope to press forward, to share warmth in the cold hush of night, to mark danger not with retreat but with ritual. In the decline of the monsters came the rise of meaning, of eyes meeting across darkness, of footsteps echoing with intention. And so, as the ancient wind carries away the last breath of their tale, we light the flame once more, not to banish shadows, but to honor what lingered within them. This is the inheritance. No extinction can erase the quiet, radiant truth that we were not merely survivors of monsters, but their measure, drawn forward into humanity by the shape of their pursuit and the fire we dared to carry through the night. And so the tale passes beyond firelight, into the hush that follows all great reckonings, not as a warning etched in fear, but as a testament born of shared breath and endurance. The monster hyenas are gone, their forms surrendered to dust and erosion, yet the transformation they ignited burns on. For in the age before language and law, our ancestors became more than prey, not by force, but by gathering close in the face of the beast. From cracked bones beside ancient hearths, to the stillness that hushes the soul before sleep, their echo lingers in instinct and in ritual. We do not remember them to glorify their hunger, nor to relive their terror, but to honor the path we walked beside them, the long, trembling climb from hunted to human. And in each story passed beside flame, in each cautious watch kept beneath starlit canopy, their memory endures, not as monsters, but as the shadow that shaped the light. Forever carried in the fire we refuse to let die. And at the very end, beyond time's edge and memory's reach, there remains only the ember still glowing, still warm to the touch, lit once by trembling hands who dared to gather despite the dark. The monster hyenas neither asked nor knew what they gave, but in their towering silence and unyielding pursuit, they delivered us into the age of story, of fire, of fellowship. We hail from those who survived not through strength, but through gathering, not through claws, but through community. So let their legacy rest not as dread, but as devotion etched deep in the rhythm of flame and breath, that sheltered a budding species against a world that offered no certainties. The monsters are gone, but the fire remains, and it is ours to tend forever. Because in the end, the final gift of the monster hyenas was neither fear nor force, but meaning, unchosen perhaps, but enduring all the same. They were not merely part of the wild, they were the forge beside which our first selves were shaped, in fire, in story, in the quiet breath before sleep. We carry still that early pact, that we rose together not simply to survive, but to remember. Their bones have long turned to stone, their cries absorbed by time, but the echo of their gaze, the pressure of their presence, still courses through us in instinct, in myth, and in the silence we sometimes hold without knowing why. So let that be the closing of their tale, not an ending, but a continuation carved not in stone but in us. And thus, the circle closes, not with the fading breath of a predator, but with the enduring fire it helped ignite. The monster hyenas, now vanished into the sediment of epochs, will never know the role they played in shaping the dawn of human sentience. They asked no questions, offered no grace, yet their very presence compelled answers that would stretch across millennia, in forcing us to look to one another, to kindle flame not just for heat but for hope. They gave rise to the first flickers of identity. And so beneath the stars, as we gather still around the warmth inherited from those fearful nights, we do not speak their names with dread, but with reverence, for through their menace we found our minds, through their silence, story, through their shadow, the light. This is their echo, soft and unending, not a roar that terrifies, but the breath that kindled the beginning, not a monster slain, but a truth revealed, that from darkness we learn not just to survive, but to become. And now the silence deepens, not as an absence, but as a curtain drawn across the first great act of our becoming. In the quiet that follows, we do not hear the laughter of the monster hyenas, nor the roar of ancient fires, but something softer, the rhythm of breath united in survival, of minds awakened beside peril's edge. There are no more prints to follow, no more bones to uncover, yet we carry their presence as surely as if it were carved into every flame we light, every story we tell in the dark. From that long night of fear and fire, we emerged, not as rulers, but as rememberers, shaped by what we dared to face together. And in that, we became more than survival, we became meaning. So let the echoes lie gently now beneath the ancient earth, honored not with monuments, but with every act of vigilance, every step forward, and every whispered tale that keeps the light from fading. For though the monster hyenas are gone, their question was timeless, and so is our answer: to endure, to remember, and to pass the fire on. So let this be the last breath, not of the monsters, but of meaning born in their shadow. As the fire dwindles into ember, and the stars claim the sky once more, we do not part this story with finality, but with reverence. For the monster hyenas, nameless in their passing, and wordless in their legacy, gave us the oldest truth, that even in the face of unrelenting night, we could stand together, light-driven, and memory-fed, and rise. Their echoes have not faded, only transformed, unfolding quietly in our gathering circles, pulsing through each gesture of protection and story passed forward. We carry what they once tested, not fear, but the will to overcome, to imagine, to remember. So rest now, great shadows of the past, your lesson etched so deeply that not even time can unwrite it. For in every fire we kindle, you endure, not as monsters, but as the first muse of all we came to be. And so, as the final spark dances upward into the vast and waiting dark, the story of the monster hyenas closes not in fear, but in fire. They asked nothing, demanded nothing, yet through their presence, they carved the silhouette of what humanity would one day become. In their silent wake, we found memory. In their shadows, we uncovered vision, and in the long, slow arc from prey to people, we learned the quiet strength of endurance shared. Let the wind carry their name without voice. Let the stars remember what the earth no longer bears, for deep in our marrow, where instinct ends and understanding begins, their legacy breathes. A final lesson shaped by pursuit, softened by time, bound forever in the fire we still choose to tend. The monsters are gone, and we, the keepers of their echo, remain not alone, but together, with stories lit like torches beneath the endless sky. So let the fire burn low, and the silence rise high, like the ancient skies once full of hunger and awe. Let us mark this ending not with triumph, but with truth, that from the darkness walked not only monsters, but meaning. And now, as all echoes gently settle, and the last light coils into the bones of the past, we carry on not untouched, but unchanged in the ways that matter most. The monster hyenas are gone, yes, but their breath still stirs the embers of who we are. Born in peril, forged through memory, we survived not because we escaped the night, but because we lit our stories within it. And as we turn from their tale into the quiet of tomorrow, we do so with reverence, with wonder, and with the fire always burning, deep within us, always shared. Let it then be known, in the hush that follows all telling, that the tale of the monster hyenas was never just about beasts lurking in grass, but about the sacred tension between what could destroy and what chose to endure. In their ceaseless pursuit, they shaped us not by hunger alone, but by requiring us to choose each other in the dark, to find meaning amid chaos, to mold memory from fear. The fire we tend today does not retell their dread. It honors their role in our rising a flame that does not fear the night, but understands its purpose. And in that light, our ancestors are never truly gone, nor the monsters they once faced. They remain in the circle drawn beneath the stars, in the breath shared between silence and story, in the pulse of every life that dares to gather against the unknown. The end is not silence nor shadow, but flame steady, speaking across time not of terror, but of what it took to become. And thus, at the edge of breath and ash, we close the arc not in darkness, but in light, the light born unquestioningly in the eyes of those who gathered close when all the world was made of fang and silence. The monster hyenas are gone, their bodies dissolved into the memory of earth, but their echo trails behind us, still not as fear-chasing footfall, but as the quiet rhythm beneath every shelter built, every fire sparked in the hush before night. They gave us no guidance, no mercy, no warning. But in their challenge, they sparked the first tether between mind and flame, between danger and meaning. From that bond we rose, fragile and unfinished, held together first by instinct, then by story. And in those stories, told still, in the flicker of dying embers, they do not perish. They are remembered, deeply and without malice, as the creatures who hounded our steps until we turned, trembling toward each other and survived. That is the truth they leave behind, not of monsters slain, but of a humanity forged by watching the dark and choosing to bring the light. So let the last ember glow and the silence cradle all that came before. For the story has walked its long circle through fire, through fear, through the becoming of something more than prey. The monster hyenas no longer roam the tall grass, nor haunt the boundary of flame. But what they ignited endures. The thread of vigilance, the bond of memory, the strength born of shared watching. We stand not above them, but because of them, carved not in triumph, but in reverent survival. Their echo exists in the way we still draw near in darkness, the way we still listen to the night. With no need for statues or songs, they are held in every flame passed hand to hand, in every hush before stories begin. And in that sacred flicker between dread and defiance, their lesson flares eternal, that to endure the night Humanity dared to light the first fire, not only against what hunted, but for who we were becoming. This is their epitaph, written not in stone, but in us. And so, at the threshold where memory yields to myth and darkness yields to dawn, let one final truth remain. The monsters were real, but so was the fire. The monster hyenas, with jaws strong enough to rewrite the order of the wild, did not simply vanish, they passed their flame to us, in fear and in form. We carry it now not as burden, but as birthright. For each time we draw near to one another at day's end, kindle warmth not only against cold, but against silence, we fulfill the unspoken bond forged in ancient peril. It was never about slaying the beast. It was about surviving with story, enduring through unity, and lighting the way forward where only shadows once waited. That is the final lesson stitched in bone and breath. We did not defeat the monsters. We listened, we remembered. And in doing so, we became their answer, fire-lit, story-bound, undaunted. So here, at the end of the fire line where history curls into ember and story falls into breath, we release them not as beasts, but as origins. No roar trails their exit, only the soft exhale of a species that outlived its terror by turning it into tale. The monster hyenas hunted in darkness, and in their pursuit, they pressed into us something immortal, the ability to unite, to remember, to ignite the void with meaning. And even now, as silence settles across the savannah, like snowfall forgotten by time, we walk with that ember aglow, within a quiet inheritance, carried not in footprint, but in fire kept burning, together. This is not the story of what vanished, but the radiance of what remained us, still gathering beneath the stars, keepers of the flame, shaped by the monsters who made us brave enough to hold it. So now, the fire dims to its final glow, and the breath of this ancient tale folds quietly into the dust of what's been endured. The monster hyenas are gone. Yes, their teeth dissolved by the passage of time, their forms swallowed whole by memory's slow layering. But they have never truly left us. In ways subtle and inescapable, they remain not as haunters of wild places, but as the unspoken architects of the human soul. They shaped the contours of fear, so that courage could rise. They pressed upon our lives not to destroy, but to force creation of tools, of bonds, of story. And so the circle closes, not with forgetting, but with tending. Tending the fire they once threatened, now made sacred. As the last ember sighs into ash, remember, it was not the darkness that defined us, but how we answered it, together. In every fire we light still, they are honored. In every hush at twilight, they wait, woven forever into the heartbeat of what it means to be human. So let this be the final ember, the last breath, drawn from that long silence between predator and awakening, not as mourning, but as a benediction to the beasts who burned the first question into our flesh. What will you become when the dark comes calling? The monster hyenas, fierce and forgotten, needed no shrine to endure. They are the reason we remember before we speak, the root of that ancient instinct that pulls strangers closer when the firelight narrows. In their pursuit, they did not end us, they unmade our unknowing. And what followed was not vengeance or conquest, but story, the bridge from dread to meaning. As the savannah lies still, and the stars wheel silently above, their memory folds into us like dusk into ash, not monstrous, not myth, but eternal. For if becoming human was a fire softly lit against the night, then the monster hyenas were the wind that made us shield it, and in doing so, taught us never to let it fade. And so, with breath held between darkness and dawn, we close the story not upon a final conquest, but upon a light still glowing within. In that deep ancestral hush where fire first chased away the scream of wildness, The monster hyenas took their place not as villains, but as the unknowing keepers of humanity's most sacred awakening. They offered us no choice but to remember, to imagine, to evolve. And though their bones now lie buried beneath epochs of silence and sediment, what they stirred remains unburied in our watchfulness, in our stories, in the way we sit shoulder to shoulder when the dark grows deep. Let this be their final memory, that without them there would be no fire to guard, no breath to carry forward, no story to end at all. For in haunting us, they gave us the reason we became, and in remembering them, we honor not terror, but the act of becoming itself firelit, forever enduring, and deeply, unmistakably human. So let this final light settle where all beginnings first stirred, where fear burned into fire, and silence gave rise to story. The monster hyenas are no more, yet they endure beyond their bones, in each flicker of presence we carry, each instinct still shaped by long shadows. They were neither devils nor deities, but the force that tempered our trembling into togetherness. We rose not because they fell, but because they existed, pressing us into the necessity of kin, of memory, of meaning. They hunted in the dark, and in doing so, they gave us the spark to hold against it. That is the oldest truth, that even the fiercest monsters can give birth to light, and through that light we became. So let the embers fall. Let the wind carry the last wisp of smoke through the hollows where once monsters walked. What began in the hush of fear ends now in quiet reverence, not with fanfare, but with the soft acknowledgement that we are shaped by what pressed us hardest. The monster hyenas are no longer here, yet their impact moves through time as surely as fire once chased their shapes away. In our closeness, our watchfulness, our instinct to gather when dusk descends, they remain carved into the soul of what we call human. They asked no questions, but gave us the answer we needed. Not strength, but unity. Not fangs, but flame. And now, though their laughter no longer echoes, the fire still speaks, holding close the final truth that long ago, in the deep night of becoming, we rose not as conquerors, but as keepers of the light, and that, forever, is enough. And when the final ember finally yields to ash, know this: the light that remains does not flicker in the grasslands, nor in the silent bones beneath the soil, but in us, in the way we still gather when shadows stretch long, in the instinct to listen, to mark danger not with dread, but with presence. The monster hyenas are gone, their bodies long returned to earth and silence, but their influence endures with quiet gravity, a legacy not etched in stone, but in the shape of the human soul. For in the age before speech and sanctuary, they taught us to become more by demanding we survive together. This is their truth, not horror, but origin. And so, in our every fire kindled against the dark, in every tale whispered beneath stars, they endure not as monsters, but as the spark that kindled the first flame of who we dared to be. Let this then be the final offering to the dark, not a tale of beasts defeated, but of meaning forged in their presence. The monster hyenas perished with no audience, but their lessons remain alive in every flickering hearth and careful silence between dusk and dawn. They were the unspeaking architects of our awakening, pressing upon fragile hands the urgency to gather, to remember, to light the night, not in defiance, but in understanding. In every trembling breath that gave way to fire, in every glance that sought another before sleep, they imprinted their purpose, and we answered, not with claws or cries, but with memory, carried forward like sparks between generations. The monsters are gone, but the fire remains. And in that fire lives everything. They left us fear, yes, and awe, but above all, the grace of endurance born together in the dark. So we seal this story not in finality, but in the enduring glow of what it means to remember, to carry forward a fire lit in the wilderness of our becoming. The monster hyenas are silent now, their bones dissolved into forgotten stone. But the echo of their presence hums beneath the world we built. They needed no names to leave their mark. Instead, they are felt in the hush before every fire is lit. In the tremor of instinct passed from flesh to flame. They did not shape us with intention, but with presence alone, proof that even the cruelest shadows can forge illumination. And so, as the dark stretches forward and time folds into itself, one truth shines steady and unshaken: that from the pursuit of monsters, we forged the path of meaning, and in that path, we became human firelit, memory-bound, and never truly alone. So here, the fire fades at last, not with grief, but with the quiet holiness of recall. The monster hyenas that once circled our kind beneath indifferent stars leave no scars to mourn, only the tempered brilliance of what they forged through fear. In the dark, they drove us inward, toward each other, and from that refuge rose all we have ever known: thought, story, symbol, self. They did not intend this, they only hunted, but in fleeing them, we found meaning. And now, as the final pulse of ember gives way to night, we carry not their memory as burden, but as origin. For through their pursuit, we became, and through our remembering, they endure, not in form, but in the firelit rhythm of everything human. This, at last, is their legacy. Not monsters, but makers of the light we still protect from the dark. So let the story end here, not in roar or flame, but in the steady beat of breath, drawn beside fading embers, the breath of those who survived, remembered, and passed the light forward. The monster hyenas have vanished into the silent marrow of time, yet the spark they struck against our fragile beginnings still burns, quiet and enduring. Their echo is not in the darkness we fear, but in the warmth we share. The stories we still whisper when night deepens, the instinct to gather and guard what matters. That is the answer they never sought, but gave. That together, in fire and memory, we rose. And in rising, we lit the darkness not to chase monsters away, but to become something more within it. That light remains, and with it, so do they.